Welcome back, my people. So we just learned about classical conditioning, and now we are moving on to operant conditioning, and we will be learning about the observational learning next week. So it'll be in the part 2. So this portion of the slideshow will be just solely based on operant conditioning and the reinforcements, okay? So we just learned about classical, now let's learn about operant. In your notes, I would definitely make a little squiggle and label this as operant conditioning. You want to definitely know the difference of both. Okay. All right, so just to remember, here are two really good columns of how they are different. Okay, so first, so operant conditioning and classical conditioning are, again, both forms of associative learning. So associative learning is the umbrella, and classical and operant conditioning both fall under it. Okay, so we have classical conditioning, where an organism's form is associated between the stimuli. So we have the CS and the US, remember? So conditioned stimulus and the unconditioned stimulus, right? So there's an association between the conditioned stimulus and the unconditioned stimulus. So that means that you are going to add something in. So you are going to you're going to create a neutral stimulus, which will then change it to a conditioned stimulus, right? So we have the association, and it involves automatic reaction to stimuli. So again, think of it as like an automatic action that you don't really think about, really, and it's more involuntary. So if you want to put involuntary under the classical conditioning, because operant is voluntary, you're choosing to do things, okay? And then for classical conditioning, the stimulus precedes the response it elicits, right? So again, our stimulus is what is going to keep the connection between, or should I say, so again, it's where we connect two stimuli, and with constant repetition, right, we are going to start to see these connected behaviors, right? So again, with the thunder and the lightning, right, we're going to start to associate without even thinking about it. So again, think of it as a subconscious thing or an involuntary aspect of classical conditioning where two stimuli are associated together. Okay, and then we have operant, right? And this is the reward system. So this is where organisms connect their own behavior with the consequences. And again, when it says consequences, everyone thinks bad, but no, it's just the aftermath, right? So there's the behavior, and here's the consequence after, right? And so the stimulus follows the response, and it strengthens it. So every time I clean my room, I get, I don't know, a $20 bill, right? And that consequence of getting a $20 bill is going to help me want to re-clean my room again and again and strengthen that behavior to get the response, my desired response that I want, right? And so the actions followed by the reinforcers are increased. So the more that you do it, the more remember, the more acquisition you have, the more you acquire, the stronger the reward connection is, and actions followed by a punisher decreases, and we're going to talk about that today. So hold on to that thought, write it down, and it'll make sense once we finish up our operant conditioning lesson. All right. So again, just a few little reminders. This is ways that we learn our learning connections between its behavior and the resulting events. Remember, the seals are choosing to put the ball on their nose in order to get the desired consequence, which is a fish. And so thus they're going to do it more and more often, where so there's operant conditioning. And then there's classical conditioning, right, where you associate two stimuli that it usually, we learn associations between two stimuli that happen close together, right? And again, it's involuntary. So now that every time we see lightning, I know that thunder is coming. I've already associated the two, so I might cover my ears. I won't be alarmed if it happens, right? Because over time, I associated the two together, right? Where animals may not understand the association of when we see lightning, thunder comes, and our dogs will run around crazy, right? And so that's the classical conditioning, okay? So one is reward-based, right? Operant, right? So behavior and results, right? Behavior and consequence. And then classical conditioning is the connection of two stimuli, right? So one stimuli triggers another one, right? So we see lightning, we go like this because we know we're going to hear thunder next, okay? All right. So now, before we go into operant conditioning, right, before we learn about B.F. Skinner and all that, we have to know about Thorndyke. So Edward Thorndyke, he is a behavioral psychologist, and he came up with this idea where he placed cats in this puzzle box where it was rigged, right, with a food reward on the outside. And you're going to see this video in just a minute, okay? So he wanted to see if the animals, he wanted to see how many times it took them to figure out how to escape in order to get their food reward, right? And what he found out that, as the cats did it and it got quicker and quicker because of the food reward at the end, he concluded that rewarded behavior is likely to reoccur, which is called law of effect. So again, it seems very simple. Law of effect. If we are rewarded with a behavior that we like, we will do it more often, right? And so now I would like you guys to pause the video, go to your video lecture slide, and you can watch the Thorndyke video of the cat figuring out how to get out of the box. And he gets better and better at it every time, right? Because law of effect. Rewarded behavior that we like is likely to reoccur more often, and it starts to become quicker, right? So feel free to pause me right now and go check out that video, and then come back to me after. Okay, so here's the video. So again, pause me right here, and you're gonna go watch the video on your end, okay? And I'm gonna take a sip of coffee. Okay, so after the video, so video review, right? So here's our little video review of Thorndyke. So he repeated his experiment many times. Let me see if I can go back. There you go. And observed that cats escaped the box more quickly over successive trials, right? So once they figured it out, they became quicker at it, right? So it's kind of like how your animals know where all the food hiding spots are. They are really good at knowing how if they're going to get food and they're very successful at it, they're going to get quicker and more intelligent about it, right? So again, Thorndyke concluded that he observed the cats escape the box more quickly over successive trials. And again, we are more likely to repeat an action if we like the desired result or consequence, okay? All right. Dun, 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 dun. Okay, we're going to that was for usually in class discussion. All right, so now let's talk about shaping behavior. So again, we haven't really talked about the whole operant conditioning yet, but this is leading up to it. So operant conditioning, so this is all under operant conditioning. So shaping is a vocab word. So what it means to shape is, if you've ever had a puppy, you have done this. So it means that with successful approximation, so little steps with rewarded behavior, that leads to a desired ultimate behavior. It allows, so essentially let me talk about shaping a animal to use the restroom, right? So say that we have a puppy, right? And we have to have little steps that lead them up to going to the bathroom outside. So maybe the first shaping behavior that you can do is every time the dog pees in the house, you say no, and you put him outside. Right? So starting to shape the behavior that it's not okay to go pee in the house. And next time, maybe once they go outside and go pee, you can give them a treat, right? And they're like, ooh, this is something that you guys want me to do. And so again, with successful approximations, the dog will slowly learn to go pee outside, right? But it's little steps to get there, right? Same with potty training a child, right? You have to first have a fake potty, and this is where we use the restroom, right? And it's little steps over time that shapes the behavior to the ultimate desired behavior, right? So, if we tell an infant, okay, it's time for you to learn to use the restroom right now, they're going to be like, what? What did you just say to me? We need to teach them in baby steps. So shaping is small approximations of desired behavior leading up to the big picture, right? So it helps, it allows animal trainers to get animals to perform complex behaviors. If you've ever seen animal shows, they do a bunch of jumps and tricks right on top of each other, and it's a lot of shaping over time. It doesn't happen overnight, right? So again, we've all been shaped, right? We all know the rules of our house, right? We've been shaped to do desired behavior from our parents or how we should act, right? So we've all been shaped in our life, right? And society plays a big role, right? We all are shaped by our society. So again, shaping behavior is really, really cool concept. Okay, this is a really funny, okay. Let's see if my little thingy. Here, let me try to fix it real quick. Okay, and we're back. Sorry about that. For some reason, my screen didn't, it was supposed to like have the first one come up and then the second one, and then it didn't. Anyway, so let's go on. Okay, so the big terms that you need to know when it comes to operant conditioning is that it's reinforcement. So reinforcers, when you hear that word, you are talking about operant conditioning. And on the AP test, they will have multiple choice of like an operant conditioning question with classical conditioning answers mixed in. So if you understand the terminology that goes to each one, you already know what to zone in on for your test. So you can say, oh, it can't be those two, right? So it's a way to eliminate multiple choice, okay? So let's talk about positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement, okay? And these are the big backbone of operant conditioning. So you really have to understand what a reinforcement or a reinforcer is. So a reinforcer is an event that increases the likelihood of a behavior being repeated. Again, positive and negative reinforcement, the main goal is for the behavior to be repeated, the desired behavior to be repeated. I'm going to say this again. Positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement, the main goal is for the desired behavior to happen again, okay, to reinforce the behavior. There's two types of reinforcements. There's positive reinforcement, and then there's negative reinforcement. And let me explain the difference of the two. When you think of negative reinforcement, some people think it's bad. No, I want you to get that out of your head. I want you to think of it as a math problem. So positive reinforcement is when we present a rewarding stimulus after the response. So after the child cleans its room, you get a cookie. So think of positive reinforcement as adding something in like a math problem. Positive, add something in. Negative reinforcement removes a stimulus after the response to increase the behavior. So while positive reinforcement adds something, negative reinforcement, just like the minus in math, takes something away. But they both lead to desired behavior. So I have this funny Dairy Queen picture. I know it's ridiculous, but it makes sense. So it literally says, scream until dad stops the car. Because let's think about it. If the desired behavior of the baby is to go get ice cream, the dad knows that if he goes to the ice cream, right? So dad's essentially, if you think about dad, he wants his kid to stop screaming. That's the desired behavior, right? So what dad's gonna do is to go to the ice cream store to take away the screaming, which is the desired response, right? So another example is seatbelts. So negative reinforcement is a little tricky for some, but it's okay, we'll get it down. So negative reinforcement, here's another example. Every time you get into the car, if you do not put your seatbelt on, a beeping starts to happen in your car, okay? And that's negative reinforcement because what it's trying to make you do, what is the desired behavior? To put your seatbelt on. So once you put your seatbelt on, which is the desired behavior, the beeping is taken away, right? So negative reinforcement is not a bad thing. It just means that you're taking something away in order to get your desired response. And positive reinforcement is where you give something to get your desired response, okay? So while negative reinforcement, again, what the car wants you to do is put your seatbelt on. So in order for you to get to that desired behavior, it will beep at you until you do it. And then because what you want is to take the beeping away, right? So it's getting the desired response by taking away the beeping after you do the desired behavior, right? And so a kid, after they clean their room for positive reinforcement, they're given, I don't know, freedom, lunch money, or not lunch money, but money, and they'll want to do that behavior again, right? Another example of positive reinforcement, maybe at your house, is so for me, when I was in high school, every time I got an A in one of my report cards, I would get $20 per A, right? And for me, that was a lot of money back in the day. And so for me having good, and my mom's desired behavior was for me to get good grades, which then was reinforced by me getting money, adding, right? So they added to the equation, adding money. So that'd be positive reinforcement. But say that you, say that your parents want you to do the dishes and they take away your phone if you don't do the dishes, right? What they want you to do is, so in order for your phone not to be taken away, they want you to do the desired response of doing the dishes. But how they're working it is doing negative reinforcement, because they're taking your phone away in order for you to do the desired response, which is doing the dishes, which is unfortunate, but parents are pretty smart, okay? All right, so let's move on to the next slide, my people. So again, these were just taken from your book. It does take a little bit to fully understand positive versus negative reinforcement, but remember, an easy way to think about a positive reinforcement is that you're adding something to a desirable create a desirable outcome, right? Your desired behavior. So when you call your dog to come over, you give it a pet, so you add a pet, right? And the dog will do it more often, right? Because you're adding you're adding a stimuli, right? Which will help increase the desired behavior. While negative reinforcement, right? It's where we remove an aversive stimulus, so a bad stimulus. So we take something away, right, in order to increase a behavior. So fasten your seatbelt to end the loud beeping. So taking away the loud beeping, right? And so again, these are really great definitions. Positive reinforcement increasing behaviors by presenting a positive reinforcer. You're adding something in. A positive reinforcer is a stimulus that, when presented after the response, strengthens the desired behavior, right? So if you call your dog over and they come, they're going to get a pet, and then they're going to want to come over more and more because it's a desired response, right? And it's going to increase the desired behavior of your dogs to come over, right? So you can pet them. And thinking about negative reinforcement, right, increasing behavior by stopping or reducing aversive stimuli, a negative reinforcer is any stimulus that, when removed, right, after the response, it strengthens it. So again, the reason that you keep buckling your seatbelt on these new cars, right, is you want to remove that annoying beeping that happens. I always tell my mom it sounds like she's going to blow up. And she's like, I need to get my seatbelt. I was like, you're blowing up. And so anyway, but it leads us to the desired behavior. So even car mechanics, even car engineers are conditioning ourselves to be safe, right? To put on our seatbelt, or else you're going to be beeped at, right? So it's so interesting when you think about how many ways we are being shaped and how many ways that, we are being dictated by desired behavior, right? Because if you think about it, grades, for example, right? The positive reinforcement for a lot of you, right, is, turning in your assignments leads to the desired behavior of having good grades, right? So again, it's this whole psychological thing, but I think it's really cool. Okay, so now we're going to move on to primary reinforcers, and there's a reason that there's a burger on my screen. So primary reinforcers are naturally reinforcing. We want, so again, so taking medication to stop pain, right? So we have food, water, take away pain. These are all innate things that we want to happen, and it's naturally reinforced. So primary reinforcers is, food, because we need food to live, water, right? Also taking away pain. We don't want to, pain is an aversive stimulus. So primary reinforcers are natural. They are unlearned, right? So even though medication is the example, think about the aspect of like not being in pain, because being a human, we don't want to be in pain, right? But pain tells us when we're in trouble with our body, right? But think about pain in general. So like food, water, and pain, these are all natural reinforcers that we use to increase behavior, but they're biological needs. Okay, so think about food and water primarily being a biological need that reinforces your behavior, right? So while we have secondary reinforcers, which these are conditioned because we did not come out of the womb fresh out of the womb thinking, I need to make money and have good grades, right? So primary reinforcers are not taught. Secondary reinforcers are conditioned. They are learned from our society, okay, or from your family. So conditioned secondary reinforcers are something we have learned to value. So grades, right? So if you use grades as a reinforcer, you have been taught to value grades, right? Because we weren't taught to value food. We know that we need food to survive, right? So that's a primary, it's like the first responder to your reinforcements. And then think about the secondary reinforcers as what you've learned from society, okay? And remember, reinforcers, so reinforcement is to help desired behavior, okay? So for example, if we think back to our primary with like the food, right? Let's think about um, our food. Dogs, a lot of the things that they are taught are based on food, right? What if you tried to teach your dog how to do a trick and you're gonna give them money in return? Your dog ain't gonna do anything. They don't care about money. They don't care about grades. They'll probably eat your homework, right? That's the classic response. But remember, primary reinforcers are not taught, and secondary reinforcers are taught through our society. Okay, we learn to value them. We learn to value them. Okay, all right. And so now I wanted to talk to you about reinforcement schedules. So when we think about reinforcing behavior, there's different ways to do it, and it's everywhere in our society. Okay, so make sure that you write down continuous reinforcement, and that first vocab term is the desired response is reinforced every time it occurs. Okay, the desired response is reinforced every time it occurs. So, for example, every time you call your dog over, he always gets a scratch, right? Have you ever tried to like call your dog over and like hover your hand over them like you're going to scratch them and you don't, and then they look at you confused, like, "Whoa, I did not sign up for this. You're supposed to be petting me right now." So continuous reinforcement schedule means that the desired response is reinforced every time it occurs, every time. Okay. The second type is partial reinforcement. Partial reinforcement. So there's two types. There's continuous reinforcement, and then there's partial. And we're going to dive into partial reinforcement. So in your notes, maybe put it like in a little arrow, because the next couple of slides will be under partial reinforcement. And I'll move my little camera screen away so you guys can read it. So the other word for partial is intermittent. And it means that it's not all the time reinforced, right? So responses are sometimes reinforced and sometimes not reinforced. So, for example, the what was I going to say? Sorry, I got distracted. So, for example, I was trying to get my camera back on. So, for example, maybe every other time you have your dog sit, he gets a treat, but not all the time, right? So sometimes, but it's still reinforcing the behavior. Okay, it just has a different amount of times that it does so. Okay, so we have continuous, which is every time you give your dog a treat, and then for this one, for partial, it's every other time, every fifth time, right? So it's partial, it's intermittent, and there's different types of intermittent reinforcement, and you all have been affected by this. So let's rock your world, shall we? So let's start with the first one. Is gambling continuous reinforcement or partially reinforcement? So first off, if gambling was a continuous reinforcement and every time we played, we would get a reward back and money back, we would all be at the casino. So I'm just going to break it to you. The casino or anytime you gamble, it is partial reinforcement. Not all the time you're going to win. So if you ever looked into slot machines, they're like set to win at certain time. Like it's really intricate, but people play thinking that they're going to get lucky, right? And they think they're going to cheat the system, but it's partial reinforcement, right? So now we're going to talk about the different types of schedules for reinforcement, okay? So in your notes, this is under partial, intermittent schedules, right? So the first one is this. So this is the one everyone falls victim to, and I call this the Starbucks schedule. So this is what happens to me, okay? So this is your first vocab term. So the fixed ratio schedule, that's the name of this term, okay? Fixed ratio schedule. So this is when reinforced behavior after a set number of responses. So after every so many. So let's talk about let's talk about Dutch Bros. I have one of those Dutch Bro cards where it's like stamp, like where you get them stamped every time. So buy 9 drinks and get the 10th one free. So you get a reinforcement every 10 drinks. And that is why you keep coming back, because you're trying to get that free drink, but in reality, you're still paying the money, aren't you? So again, coffee shops. This is like anything that has those little cards you get to like get stamps. They are trying to reinforce you coming back in, right? And so it's a set, so a fixed ratio is, it's a fixed number. So after every 10 drinks, you get the 11th free, right? It produces very high rates of responding. So this is where marketing gets really interesting. So if you ever go into marketing, you will know all about this. So again, it has very high responses. So look at that. Oh my gosh. People came back, right? So even if you didn't get rewarded every time you went, you still came back for that reward, that fixed reward ratio, right? All right, let's go to the next one. So our next type of schedule is called variable ratio schedule. Okay, so the variable ratio, and this is the success, so you can kind of see them, compare them. Okay, so fixed ratio tends to have the highest success rate to have people come back. But let's talk about the variable ratio schedule. So this is when reinforced behavior after an unpredictable number of responses. So it's an unpredictable number. This is where slot machines are. So in your notes, please highlight, this is a perfect example. So variable ratio schedule, slot machines, gambling. It is an unpredictable number, but it produces high rates of responding as people think they're going to win the jackpot. And this is why casinos never go out of business, right? People always think they're going to get lucky, even though some machines are unpredictable, but others there's a schedule, right? There's actually a whole science behind gambling, which we can go into in another day. But the variable ratio is where it's a unpredicted number of responses for after an unpredicted number. Okay, so again, after an unpredictable number, so it could be every 7 times you win the jackpot, every 20 times, right? So it's different every time, but it still causes high success rates because you never know when it's going to happen, right? All right, so the next one, I know there's a couple, and these are the ones that a lot of people get mixed up, so it's okay. But if you see this fixed interval one, so while the other ones went straight up, this one improves over time. Okay, so this one takes time. So fixed interval schedules is when the reinforce first response after a fixed time period. So every so often. So checking for snail mail, or cramming for a test, or produce a choppy stop and start pattern of responding. So what usually happens is there's a rapid response near the time of reinforcement. So for example, if you are cramming for a test, right? You're on this fixed interval that that right before the test, so there's certain time periods that you are going to cram, right? So it's a fixed interval, and it has rapid responding right near the time where you're usually reinforced. So me giving the test and you wanting to have a good test grade is your reinforcement to start cramming, right? And it's not all the time. It's just right before the reinforcement is given, right? Which is my test, right? And you want to do well on the test. So it's a fixed interval schedule, okay? And even though over time it's still successful, it's not as quick, right? It produces a choppy stop and start pattern. So again, cramming is not for everyone, right, my people? And last but not least, my people, let me make sure, okay, is variable interval schedule. And this is the worst one. So if you can tell, look how bad at responding this one is, but there is still a steady incline, right? Steady responding. It's not the best type of reinforcement. So variable interval schedules is the first response after a very time interval. So it's unpredictable. So sometimes you'll get something, sometimes you won't. Kind of like checking your email in your inbox, right? I, for one, check my email all the time, but it's because it's my main communication. But this produces a steady responding, slow but steady, right? It's unpredictable. So my need to check my email is not as strong as me wanting to go to Starbucks for my 9th drink because I know I'm going to get rewarded on the 10th, right? On the 10th drink. But for this one, I don't know when I'll get rewarded, so it takes longer to acquire, right? Okay, so those are the reinforcements. I would highly recommend coming up with mnemonics to try to separate those 4 types, okay? Because they are confusing. So real quick, I don't know why it does this. Okay, hold on, give me just a second to move this out of the way. All right, my people, sorry, Google Slides wasn't, usually it's like layered into my lecture, but for some reason it didn't, it just kind of went on top of each other. So now that we know about reinforcements, I want you guys to put a squiggle in your notes, and now we're talking about punishment. It is a completely different thing than reinforcement. So reinforcements are meant to increase the desired behavior. Punishment decreases your behavior. Punishment is what you want to use to stop a behavior. Reinforcement, positive or negative, so positive or negative reinforcement, the main goal is to improve behavior, is to increase the behavior, the desired behavior, right? Punishment is to stop it. So when we use positive or negative punishment is because we want to stop a behavior. So for example, positive, remember, just think about adding it in. So administering an unwanted stimulus, like a speeding ticket, you receive the speeding ticket, right? And it says spanking, but again, if you want to think of like older terms, you can say take away the car, right? But the whole point of the cop giving you a ticket is for you to stop the behavior of speeding. They don't want you to increase your behavior of speeding, right? So positive punishment is by adding a stimulus to decrease the behavior. You do not want the behavior to happen again. You do not want it to happen again. Negative punishment is where you take away a desired stimulus, right? So, for example, if you are caught drinking and driving, you get a DUI and your license is taken away, right? So you won't drive drunk again, right? So that's the behavior they want to stop, right? So taking away something to stop a behavior is negative punishment. Okay, so for example, if your parents have ever taken away your phone because you snuck out at night, they do not want your behavior of sneaking out to continue, so they're trying to stop it by taking away a desired stimulus. Okay, so parents use this all the time. You can even think about how your parents have done this to you, like, right? So this is where I would ask for examples, and I'm sad I can't hear them, and maybe that'll be one of our DIs this week. Okay, so remember, reinforcement, positive or negative, increase behavior. Punishment, positive or negative, the end goal is to stop the behavior. Okay? All right. Oh, here's my little arrow. So this is what was on top of my other screen, but it helps kind of put it together, the difference of reinforcement versus punishment, because a lot of people get it mixed up. So let's look at stimulus is presented. So we're looking at positive reinforcement and positive punishment. So positive reinforcement is to increase the behavior. Petting your dog, giving your dog a treat to increase the behavior. Positive punishment is when you give something to stop the behavior. So this is where back in the day, parents would spank, right? Give something, spank, in order to stop whatever behavior that they were doing, right? Now let's think about when our stimulus is removed. So now we're thinking about negative reinforcement and negative punishment. A lot of students think they're the same thing. They are not. Negative reinforcement is where we take away a stimulus to increase desired behavior. I'm going to buckle my seatbelt to take away the beeping, which is where I'm in my desired behavior is now that I have my seatbelt on, right? So that's how we increase that behavior. Negative punishment is when we take something away to stop the behavior. So again, when a cop takes away your license, they're stopping the behavior of you driving recklessly, right? They do not want you to continue your behavior. I hope this makes sense. Okay. All right, my people. So real quick. So now two new vocab terms, okay? So now we're kind of off of the negative and positive reinforcement. You can do a little squiggle on your notes. This is just more vocab that goes along with operant conditioning. So latent learning is learning that becomes apparent only when there is an incentive to demonstrate it, okay? So that means that, and we're gonna see an example of this later in class next week. So this is when, so apparently, latent learning could be, you know how to get to the store, but you're not gonna demonstrate it until you need to, right? Similar to, we all have cognitive maps in our brain. So a mental representation of physical features in our environment. So if you were to think of Windsor right now, and you closed your eyes and thought about how am I going to get to school, you could probably think of the map of how to get to school and you drive there. So the more you drive, the more of your cognitive map you develop and you don't have to use directions as much, right? So my cognitive map of Santa Rosa is a lot better than Windsor just because I'm kind of moving around in it all the time, right? So again, we have mental maps in our mind that helps us judge, how long it'll take to go someplace and oh, if I'm leaving for my friends, so it's like about 10 minutes away down this street, this street, and this street, right? So we all have cognitive maps within our brain. So thinking about biological constraints, just like I kind of talked about earlier in the last lecture where we can't train a fish to climb a tree, right? Biologically, animals are predisposed to do certain things, right? So it'd be really crazy to try to teach a mouse how to type full sentences on a keyboard because that's just not what their mental capacity is, right? So biological constraints are predisposed organisms to learn associations that are naturally adaptive. So for example, for pigeons, they naturally peck. So there has been studies of teaching pigeons to peck certain buttons to get food. That is okay because that's within their wheelhouse. That's what they've known to do. Kind of similar to dogs, fetching balls, right, and bringing them back and getting a scratch. It's innate to them. That's what they know. Their bodies are able to do that, right? We're not going to ask a snake to swim, even though I do know that some snakes swim, but we kind of get the gist, right? Hamsters can be conditioned to dig or rear up food for reinforcements, which are behaviors that are associated with hunting food. So we can teach, chipmunks to store things in their mouths, right? Because that's what they naturally do. Again, pigeons can be taught to flap their wings to avoid shock or peck to obtain food. It's within their wheelhouse, right? So again, we cannot ask a fish to climb a tree. Biologically, physically, it can't happen. Right? It's kind of similar to making humans we're going to learn how to fly, right? Just on our own, which I wish we could do, but biological constraints. There's our pigeon. All right, so we are ending the last part of our lecture, and we are ending on, I want to make sure I don't go too far, on 20. 25, yeah. Okay, so if you can take a moment to please copy this into your notes. So please, I do want this little chart in your notes. It really helps you understand the difference of classical versus operant. So first, classical, just to review, classical conditioning, right? Organisms learn associations between events that it does not control. Right? So again, it's involuntary. So my connection so again, when I think of, every time I smell fire, I immediately start to, my sympathetic system starts to fly up because I associate fires with fleeing, with anxiety, right? So as we learn and respond to situations, we adapt what our responses are, right? So again, classical conditioning, right? Association between two events or stimuli. And operant conditioning is when we learn connections between its behavior and the resulting events. So while this is involuntary, this is voluntary. You're choosing to go for rewards, okay? All right, so let's look at the response, okay? So again, like I talked about, when we think of the response, when a classical versus operant, classical is reflexive, very involuntary. It's like a reflex. When I smell fire, I don't choose to think about the Tubbs fire. It just happens. It's an automatic, it's involuntary, right? My operant conditioning is voluntary. If I want to be able to go out tonight to visit my friends, I know that I will have to clean my room in order to get my desired behavior, which is for me to go out, right? So again, it's a voluntary choice. So the seals, the seals who have the balls on top of their nose, they're choosing to put the ball on top of their head in order to get a treat, okay? So the basis of learning, classical conditioning is the association between two stimuli, conditioned stimulus and the unconditioned stimulus, right? And then operant conditioning is connecting a response and the consequence or the desired behavior. So when I say consequence, a lot of people think consequences are bad, but just think it's the desired behavior after. So connecting a response to the desired behavior, right? So again, connecting those two, right? How do we motivate people to do things, right? And then there's the extinction process. So just like I talked about earlier, the conditioned response decreases when the conditioned stimulus is repeatedly represented alone. So that means that if Pavlov stopped doing the bell, the dogs would, after time, wouldn't respond to it, right? Because it's not giving them their desired stimulus, right? It's not making the connection for them anymore, right? It's not making, the bell doesn't connect to the food anymore, so it doesn't connect to the salivating, right? I move my little camera. And then for operant conditioning, right? Responding decreases when reinforcement stops, right? So if you were told like you were getting money for your grades, or how about this? Or like so like say you were getting money for your grades and all of a sudden your mom's like, I'm not gonna give you more money, right? It might stop your reinforcement of trying to get good grades because you're no longer getting the desired response, right? Or the desired behavior, right? So interesting enough. Okay, one last little graph. So again, take a minute to copy this down. So take a quick second. Slide. And this is our last slide. All right. So again, classical conditioning, same thing up here. So let's think about the cognitive process, so the thinking process. So we have organisms develop expectations that the conditioned stimulus signals on the arrival of the unconditioned stimulus. So essentially, when it says develop expectations, we develop a connection. We develop a connection between the two stimuli. Okay, so that's our cognitive process. So there's a neural pathway made, which is a connection to the two stimuli that were previously not connected, right? So like me smelling fire 10 years ago would have done nothing to me because I haven't experienced this fire. I haven't experienced the fires yet. And then when we think about cognitive process with operant conditioning, organisms or humans or animals develop expectations that a response will be reinforced or punished. Organisms exhibit, so when I say organisms, human, animals, whatever, exhibit latent learning without reinforcement. So sometimes, a dog will sit next to you in hopes of getting a pet, even if you stop the reinforcement, right? Because they know the skill set of what to do. They just only maybe want to show you every once in a while, right? So again, and then the biological predispositions. So natural predispositions constrain what stimuli and responses can easily be associated. So again, we cannot force animals to do something outside of their wheelhouse. A fish can't climb up a tree. That's like the best thing I got. And here, I'll move my little camera out of the way so you guys can finish writing that down. So we can't do unnatural behaviors, right? But that'd be pretty cool. Anyway, so that's the end of our intro to operant conditioning. Stay tuned till next week to have more videos. And I hope you guys enjoyed and took something away from today and applying it to your life. And you are more than welcome to start on the activities now.